So in this video, we're going to learn how to create a dropper so that you can actually start earning money from your tycoon. So first thing we need to do is we need to get a model for our dropper. Now, I'm not too bothered about how this is going to look, so I'm going to go to the toolbox and I'm just going to search for a dropper. Now again, you've got to be careful when you are going through the toolbox because you might find a dodgy model, but I'm going to show you how to make sure your model is safe. So I'm just going to find a dropper and I'm going to drag it into the game. Now here's the first thing you've got to be careful of. So it says neon dropper includes one script. Now we don't want any scripts, so I'm just going to click on OK. I'm going to close down the toolbox for now. But then in the Explorer, what we can do to make sure this is a good model is we're just going to open up all of the nested tabs here. So just make sure you can see everything. And then if you see any scripts, we're just going to remove them. And you should just only see parts. If you see some parts contain like a fire object or sparkles or a script, just remove them, okay? So once you've figured out that your dropper is safe, or of course you could just build your own, right? Like it's not that hard. I'm just doing this for the sake of the tutorial. So when you've done that, just drag it onto your plot somewhere. I mean, let's put it over here, okay? And then what we want to do is we want to have some kind of conveyor, right? Because that's typically what happens in a tycoon. You have a dropper, it drops some kind of part onto a conveyor. The conveyor then, brings it all the way over to here and what have you. So let's go ahead and create a simple little conveyor. So I'm going to insert a part, and we're just going to scale it over here, and we'll just make it so that it is wide enough that it covers the width of the dropper. And then we're going to just increase the size slightly. I'm going to make it grey, and I'm just going to actually reduce the size a little bit. So here's our conveyor, right? And then I'm going to just add some parts to the side of it. I'm going to Control D to duplicate this part, and then I'm just going to move it to the edge. And this is going to act as like a little wall, okay, to prevent the little dropper parts from falling out. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to duplicate with Control D, and we're just going to drag it to this side, okay? So there we go, very simple conveyor. And then I'm just going to select all three parts and make sure that it's still within the boundary of our plot, like that. And then if you want, you can just make sure that the dropper is centered. And there you go. We've created a simple conveyor. Only problem is it doesn't work yet. So we need to firstly select all three parts of our conveyor, okay, by holding down Control or Command if you're on a Mac. When they're all selected, go to the Properties window, make sure Anchored is checked, and then you can group these parts together. So I'm just going to right click on them all and select Group as a model, and I'm going to call this model Conveyor, okay? So we've created a model for our conveyor, and we now have a model for our dropper. So I'm going to just close down the nests on the dropper here, and I'm going to name my dropper Dropper. So by this point, you should have a model that's called Dropper and a model that is called Conveyor. Okay. Last thing we need is a little part over here which will collect our drops and will convert them into money. So let's just create. Let's select this part, which is our conveyor part. We're going to duplicate this specific part, and we're just going to move it along here. And then I'm going to scale it down. This is just going to be like a little collection area, okay? And I'm going to extend our walls as well. You can select one part that's in a model by holding Alt, right? Or I think it's Option on a Mac if you just want to select one part like that. There you go. And finally, we will just duplicate this part to create a barrier at the end. Okay, so we now have got our conveyor all set up and totally working. It's just good at this stage to make sure again by selecting all of your parts that they're all anchored. This means that they won't fall to pieces when we start the game up, and it all looks good to me. So we've got our little conveyor, and there's a little clash issue here. I'm just going to select our white part and move it here. There we go. Okay, we're totally good to go. So now, last thing that we've got to do before we can start coding is we need to make this conveyor part work. So when a drop lands on this part, we want it to move all the way down to the white part. And to do this, we just need to set the velocity property. So if we go down to the properties window, we've got assembly, linear velocity, and there should be a velocity property. Okay, so we actually are going to have to do this in code, but that's all good. What I'm going to do is I'm just thinking about this. What we'll do is we'll take our little conveyor part here. I'm pressing Alt and clicking it. So this specific part that we want to be the conveyor, I'm just going to name it belt. Yeah, I should have just called it the belt, shouldn't I? So I'm going to select the belt part, and then I'm going to click on the plus, and I'm going to insert a script. And then inside of this script, I mean, if you want, you can name it belt script, so we know what it is. But then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to simply say script.parent.velocity. We probably shouldn't be using velocity, to be honest, because it is deprecated. So I'll look into a better solution soon. But for now, it should be okay. Script.parent.velocity equals vector3.new. And then we need to find the direction of travel. So I believe it's going to be the z-axis. So we want it to be going left on the z-axis. So I'm just going to put 0, 0, 10 and hope that that works. And then what we'll do is we'll test it by going to the top left, selecting home, clicking on the little arrow that's underneath the play button, and choose run. And what we can do is we can just drop a part onto the conveyor, and look at that, it's moving. Perfect. So that is exactly what we wanted to happen. All right. Okay, next thing we need to do is we need to set up our dropper. So I'm going to select this part of our dropper. In fact, you know what? I'm just going to insert a script into our dropper here. And this script, I'm going to call it dropper script. And what we want this script to do is we just want it to spawn a part every few seconds from the dropper. Okay, so very simple. We're just going to say while task.wait to do, and that will repeat every 2 seconds. We're just going to say, let's firstly create the part that it's going to drop first. Okay, so we're going to go back, we're going to click on the part button up here, and we're just going to design the part that is going to be produced by this dropper. So it's for me, I just want a small square part. Okay, I'm going to make it neon blue because it seems to be what this dropper looks like. You can customize it however you like, and I'm just going to call it dropper template. Okay, and I'm going to then take this dropper template and I'm going to put it into server storage. All right, now we can go back to our dropper script, and I'm going to create a variable for our dropper template, which is still stored in server storage. So local dropper template equals game.serverstorage : wait for child dropper template, like this. So this will wait until it finds the dropper template, just because sometimes the script can start running before the dropper template has been loaded in completely. So this will just make sure it's waiting until it finds it. And then every 2 seconds, we're going to say local new dropper part equals dropper template : clone new dropper part dot cframe equals, and this is us telling the script where we want to spawn the part. Now, in our case, we want to spawn it at this drop part. Now, if you've built your own conveyor, you should have one of these parts, right, where it sort of is semi-transparent and it shows off where the drops will come from. Okay, so I just recommend you have one of those. I mean, for me, I've set it up so that this part is called drop and it's inside the model. So yours may vary, but as long as you, in our script, we set the C-frame to that part's position, we'll be all good. So new dropper part dot C-frame equals script dot parent dot drop dot C-frame. Okay, like I say, this can vary, of course, because your part Might be a different name, might be in a different place, whatever. But just make sure you set this to a reference, right, from your script to this part. Or you could even set it to be its own position in the world, like it doesn't really matter. And of course, you can play around as well with adding or subtracting vector3 values. So if you wanted to position it slightly below that part, then you could say -5 studs here, or add 5 studs or whatever. But for me, this should work perfectly fine. And then we're going to say new dropper part dot parent equals, where should we put this? Let me think. I'm also going to create a folder. Okay, I'm going to create a folder in my dropper. So I'm going to click on the plus for the model. I'm going to search for a folder. I'm going to select it. And then I'm going to set this to be called dropper parts. And then I'm going to set the parent of these new parts to script.parent.dropper parts. This is just so that everything is organized. And finally, just above the, in fact, yeah, what we'll do is we'll say new dropper part, set attribute, dropper part, true. Okay, and this is just so that we have tagged it so that when something touches our white part over here, we can make sure it's actually something that came from a dropper, because we don't want everything that touches this part to give us cash, only things that came from a dropper. So if we tag our individual dropper parts with this here, then we'll know that it is allowed to give us some cash. In fact, what we can do is we can one up ourselves here, and we can say cash to give, and we can set this to a number, right? We could set this to 5, for example. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to select our dropper, right, in the Explorer. I'm going to scroll down to the properties window, and I'm going to set an attribute of this dropper. And this is going to be an attribute that tells the game how much cash each drop part from this dropper is going to give. So it's going to be a number, and I'm going to call it cash per drop. I'm going to click on save, and I'm going to just set this to 2. So every dropper part will give 2 cash, all right? And I've set that in the dropper. So now in our script, we can set the cash to give value of our specific dropper part to script.parent get attribute cash per drop. There we go. So the cash to give will be the same as the cash per drop, which is 2. And then when this dropper part touches our white part, we can just read its cash to give value and increment the player's cash. So what we'll do is we'll just apply the edits from this script. We'll go back to our Tycoon, and I'm just going to head over to the dropper area. I'm going to test this. We're going to see if parts start dropping out. So let's open up the output window. Let's clear it just in case, and we'll zoom out as well. And we'll click on run, and we'll see what happens. So our dropper parts are spawning, but they're getting stuck in the dropper. I did think that this would happen. So what we can do is we can click on the stop button, go to our dropper script, and where it says new dropper part.cframe, we'll do just what I said, which was to add on or subtract, sorry, vector3.new. We'll subtract about 2 studs. Okay, so this will position it 2 studs lower than the drop part C-frame. So again, we'll click on run, and we'll see if this changes things. Okay, there we go. So our drops are now falling out of the dropper. They are heading towards the white part, and all that's left to do is when these parts hit the white part, we just need to remove them and increment the player's currency. So click on the stop button, and finally all that's left to do is we'll go over here to our white part, hold down Alt or Option on a Mac so we can individually select it, and then in the properties panel I'm going to call this collector, and then I'm going to go up to the Explorer panel. I'm going to click on the plus, insert a script. I'm going to name this script collector script, and then we're going to create a simple touched event for when this part is touched. Connect function hit. So when something touches this part, we firstly want to check to see if it has a cash to give attribute, because that's what our dropper parts have. That's how we can tell them apart from other things which might touch our collector. So if hit :get attribute cash to give, then we firstly need to find the player who owns this plot. So how are we going to do that? Well, we know that our items, such as our conveyor and dropper, are going to be stored inside an items folder in a plot. And in our previous video, we set an attribute of the player's plot, didn't we? We set the taken and owner user ID. So we set the user ID to the owner attribute for their plot. So when this script is running, we know that it will be in someone's plot. It's not at the moment, but what we'll do for now is we will just take our three scripts here, our belt script, collector script, and our dropper script, and we will just make them disabled for now. So I'm going to select these three scripts we've been working in, I'm going to set the enabled to unchecked. Okay, so it's now disabled. And then what we'll do is we'll go back to our plot handler, and for all of the items that are in the template items, whenever they get unlocked, what we'll do is we'll just cycle through everything inside that item, and if it's a script, we will make it enabled. So for underscore comma script, script object, if you call it script, it won't work because script is a globally used term, so it has to be something other than script. So underscore script object in item clone get descendants do. If script object is a script, I think we can say base script, then script object dot enabled equals true. Okay. So now that that's done, this script, and this script will only start running once it's in a proper player's plot. So we can get the plot by saying, because the the conveyor will be inside the items folder. So we should just be able to say script.parent, given that we're in the collector script right now. So this would be the collector, .parent would be the conveyor, .parent would be the items folder, and .parent should be the plot. So I'm going to create a variable for the plot. Okay, what we'll do in the future is, because we'll probably get on to having, other things, and this might get a little bit messy, but we'll probably write a function in the future that gets the plot from a specific item. So now we've got the player's plot, we can get their user ID, and we can just create a variable for that. Okay, and then we can make sure it exists. So if not plot owner user ID, then return end. And we can also check to see if the plot doesn't exist. So if not plot, then return end. It might not exist for some reason. You can do an error message here if you want. So warn no plot owner user ID. And by this point, we know that we have found the plot owner, because otherwise it would have returned by now. So we can say local player object equals game.players get player by user ID, plot owner user ID, and this gives us their player object. So that thing that's stored in game.players, and this allows us to get access to their leader stats. So we can say player object dot leader stats dot cache dot value plus equals, and then we're going to say hit get attribute cash to give, because hit in this case is going to be that dropper part which we just created and spawned from our dropper. Finally, we are going to delete that object. So before we increment the cache, we're going to say hit : destroy. Okay, so it destroys it and then it increments the cache. So let's test this out. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take our conveyor and our dropper, and I'm going to drag them into the items folder of our template plot. Now we've added 2 new items to the game, which means we need to give them their own specific ID. Of course, our first model over there, the painting, had the ID of 1. I'm going to change the name of this to painting as well, because it was just called model for ages. But if we go to our dropper and our conveyor, we just select them both. Okay, make sure they're both selected. I'm going to add an attribute. We're going to call it ID. This is going to be a number. We'll click on save. And so their ID was number 1. For the first one, we can just make the dropper ID 2 and the conveyor ID 3. Doesn't really matter which order, as long as they're all different. So we've got 1, 2, and 3. So now we've done that, let's just take our button over here and duplicate it. And I'm going to put it over here for the conveyor. And I'm going to duplicate another one and put it over here for the dropper. Now, obviously, we need to just link these up. So the button, I'm just going to call this dropper button. And I'm going to call this one conveyor button, just so that we don't get confused. I'll call this one painting button whilst I'm at it. And then we just need to set the ID of item to unlock to their specific IDs. So the dropper has an ID of 2. So I'm going to select the button and I'm going to set the ID of that to 2. And I'm going to select the conveyor and the ID of item will be 3 for this one. Okay. So that's all set up. We can change the titles of the buttons later on. It's not really important right now. But that should be everything. Let's just go and test it out and see if it works. We might get a couple of issues here because we've been working on quite a bit of stuff. Okay, so I need to just walk over to the plot. All right, so we firstly need to give ourselves some cache. So I'm going to go to the current server, go to the Explorer, and set my cache value. Really important that you do that on the server, not on the client. A lot of people will set that value on the client and not realize why it's not working. So I've bought my painting. I'm going to then buy my conveyor. And let's just make sure that the conveyor script has been enabled, because don't forget we set all of our scripts to be disabled that was in our belt. So our belt script is running, our collector script is running. So this is a good sign. Okay, and I'm stepping on my white part here and I'm not gaining cache, which is a good sign. So it's only set to give that cache to those dropper items. And now I've unlocked my dropper. The dropper script has also started running. And look at that. The little dropper parts are hitting the white part. And then if you look closely, you can see my cache is increasing by 2 every single time. Now, there is one other issue in that there are multiple droppers here. There's one dropper here. There's 2 droppers that seem to have been created. And there's also 3 paintings here. Okay, so let's have a look and see if we can solve this problem. So if we have a look at our plot handler script, this is likely because this touched event is going to be firing multiple times when we step on the button, because I have many body parts in my character. That's many potential parts that could be colliding with this button at the same time, forcing this touched event to fire more than once. Very simple way to fix this is you just say around about here, we can just say button set attribute debounce true, and then underneath it we'll say task dot delay to function button set attribute. We can say if button then button set attribute debounce false, And let me just think here. I'm just thinking. Oh yeah, if button get attribute debounce, then return end. Okay, now this should work. What we're doing is we're basically setting a value which prevents the button from being from running this code again until 2 seconds have passed, until the debounce value is false again. So this if statement will return if the debounce attribute is true. So we're setting it to true for 2 seconds, and then after those 2 seconds we set it to false again. Of course, the button could have been destroyed by then, so we're just checking to see if it still exists. But this will prevent the code from running past this point more than once every 2 seconds. So it will only spawn the item once. So let's go and test this out. All right, so I just sped things up, gave myself some cash. Let's just click on the buttons again. And doesn't seem to be any errors in the output. Let's go into our plot and items, and this time you can see that there are only 3 items that exist, so we have fixed that issue. But the good news is we now are able to earn money from our Tycoon. We essentially now have a Tycoon game set up and working. It's still very basic, but it works. We have the ability to earn money, so we now just need to add more items really. And we also need to add data saving, which we'll probably look at next time. So you can watch that video if it's released by the time you're watching by clicking on the thumbnail. Hope to see you there.